Hi, everyone. Welcome to OCD Louisiana's OCD Awareness Week event, which is an Ask Me Anything with author and clinician Jon Hershfield. Before we introduce Jon and get started, we just want to let you know how this will work today. We have a number of questions that we have in our back pocket. And if there are any questions that folks are interested in hearing some Jon's perspective on, you can chat the co-host privately, and we will ask a question aloud. And in addition, the main purpose of this event is to learn more about Jon's experiences and insights as an OCD clinician and to advocate for the OCD community. Anything that is discussed shouldn't be considered clinical advice. And if you have any kind of questions or concerns that are more clinical in nature regarding yourself or a loved one, we would advise you to reach out to a clinician in your area. So without further ado, we're going to introduce Jon, and then we can, I guess, briefly introduce just the other folks that you're seeing on the screen. And so Jon Hershfield is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and he's the director of the Center for OCD and Anxiety at Sheppard Pratt, which is in Baltimore, Maryland. He is also the author of several books, including the Mindfulness Workbook for OCD, which I believe is on its second edition now, When a Family Member Has OCD, yes, Everyday Mindfulness for OCD and Overcoming Harm OCD. And I believe Jon's latest book is the OCD Workbook for Teens. I know in my own work, I certainly read your books and recommend them to folks. So we were super excited to have you on today. Jon, could you first just tell us a little bit about how you've gotten involved with the International OCD Foundation and what kind of work you do with them or with any of their affiliates?
Yeah, thank you for that lovely introduction, and thanks everyone for hanging out with me on this lovely Saturday in OCD Awareness Week. Yeah, it's been quite a journey. I went to my first IOCDF conference in 2005. I was in treatment for my own OCD at the time, and I lived in LA at the time, and the conference was in San Diego, I believe. And I thought, well, that's interesting, a whole conference full of people like me. What could go wrong? So drove down there to check that out, and I had a positive experience. I felt like I liked what I was hearing in the talks, and I met some interesting people. But I was I didn't have any thought in mind about being a therapist or anything like that. I was running an online support group, an old Yahoo group where people would send in emails, and I'd reply to the emails, and it was sort of equal parts complaining about my own problems and then responding to other people's complaints about their problems. And over the following year or so, I started to realize that I was really getting a lot out of communicating with people about OCD, which led to me thinking, well, what would it be like if I became a therapist? And that's why I decided to go to graduate school and get a psychology degree and become a therapist. So then when I was in graduate school, I thought it'd be neat to get a couple of extra credits towards my degree by making up a class called OCD that I was the only student in. So I convinced the teacher to let me do this. And essentially I did a bunch of research on OCD, and I went to the 2008 OCD conference and wrote a paper about it, and got 2 quarter credits for it. And I've been to every IOCDF conference since. And by 2009, I was going as I guess I was an MFT trainee at the time, but I was going as a clinician. And it was at that conference, 2009, that I met, all of my heroes, Jonathan Grayson, Charlie Mansueto, Fred Penzel, these people whose books I'd read. And, it's kind of funny. It's like, showing up at a Hollywood party and be like, oh, I've seen that guy's movie, and oh yeah, she was in such and such. It's a similar kind of feeling. And then suddenly realizing I was part of that group. So over the years, I've just continued to be as actively involved in the IOCDF as I can. With the pandemic, it's really been frustrating not being able to go in person to the conferences, and hoping that we can go next year. Just so many people. I have so many friends that I don't see very often, and Michelle's one of them. And but I feel close to them because we have this like unique conference experience, not just because we all have OCD, but there's just something about that environment. So that's me in the ICDF. And in terms of my career, I was trained at a private practice that specialized in OCD, and then I worked at an IOP at UCLA, and then I went into my own private practice. And then roughly a year and a half ago, I joined Sheppard Pratt, which is a large private not-for-profit behavioral health institution here in Maryland, and somehow found myself in the position of director of a major psychiatric department, did the Center for OCD and Anxiety. And amazingly, they have offered me the opportunity to build an OCD track into a residential program that they have. And I said, okay. and so that's what's happening. I'm now director of this outpatient center. I have 5 people who work for me, who I've trained in OCD and who are excellent. And we have an OCD program in the residential center as well, where people can come and with severe OCD and complex cases, and we just give them all the treatment that we can. And when OCD gets quite severe, once you're up at the sort of residential level, it always comes with other challenges. And in that environment, I'm surrounded by this team of experts and things that I don't know about, outside of OCD to address those challenges. So I'm consistently humbled and grateful for how much access people give me to their minds, both just on the one-on-one clinical level, and then in the ability to build these programs and help more and more people. So yeah, #OCD Awareness Week. Here we are.
I would like to just share, I don't remember which city it was, John, when we first met, but I do think that it was in between sessions, perhaps. And I was one of those people at the conference that was like starstruck, with Jonathan Grayson. And I was like, can we take a picture? And you happened to be like, I guess it was right after I had been a total nerd about that you had come up, and everybody was like, well, how about we go get a coffee? And like the coffee shop in the hotel wasn't open at that time. So I'm thinking it must have been anyway. So we walk across this very busy highway to go get coffee together, and we just chatted along the way and struck up a, friendship in the process. So it was very cool.
Thank goodness we survived the walk across the highway.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, wonderful. Well, and John also recently we learned that you have recently become a board member of the scientific and clinical advisory board of the IOCDF, which is an additional way to really contribute to our community. And so how we're planning to do this is that, myself and Michelle and Caitlin, we're all board members with OCD Louisiana. We have some different questions that, we're going to be asking, and hope that we can have a great conversation today with you, John. So I guess I'll kick it off. I'm wondering for you, what's the most rewarding aspect about being an OCD therapist?
The 2 things that always come to mind first when I'm asked that question are getting to really observe the reduction in suffering in real time. I mean, this is probably true for specialists in many different areas. That's how they feel about their specialty. But there's just something about seeing somebody improve from their OCD that it feels like something you can really witness. It's not subtle, like if somebody is, trying to get into shape for a marathon, and, they can't really tell when an individual, pound is lost or when they've gained, a stamina, they just kind of know over the long term they must be better. But there's something about these changes that happen when people treat their OCD. You can really see the suffering being lifted from them, the freedom from their OCD. And so that's just super rewarding as a clinician to be able to see it and not just wonder about it. And then the other thing is I'm just constantly fascinated by how creative people with OCD can be, right? I mean, it is an asset and a liability to be that creative. You come up with these things to obsess about. Some of them are quite funny, some of them are quite dark, some of them are quite sad. But even in these dark and sad places, just the way that people with OCD think, how they get to where they're going in their minds, it just fascinates me. So I feel like as I'm treating OCD, I'm also constantly learning about the meaning of the universe, from each patient that comes in. So it's very rewarding. It always fascinates me that there is a shortage of OCD therapists, or that there are a lot of people who don't get the extra training in OCD. I don't know why anybody wouldn't do that, because it's such great work.
Yeah, I agree. It's super rewarding and just so interesting. These are a very interesting and creative bunch of folks to be working with. That's what drew me to.
That's cool.
Michelle or Caitlin, do you have a question for Jon?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Hey, Jon.
Hi,
Hey. So just a quick question about, I guess, how maybe difficult it is for people with OCD to talk about their actual intrusive thoughts or obsessions. Do you find that you as the therapist are sometimes, or more often, the first person to ever hear about those thoughts? And what do you think might, I guess, get in the way of a person with OCD from just talking about those thoughts with other people, maybe even family members or loved ones? Just thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, it's the fundamental nature of OCD is that these thoughts are ego dystonic. They don't really line up with your identity. So some of them can be quite upsetting, and make you feel like a terrible human being. And they tend to be the things that we don't really talk about very much openly, or if we do, we always do it with kind of like a wink and a nod, or I do find that I'm often the first person that someone has said, I never told anybody this, but I mean, a lot of therapists have that experience with a lot of different things and traumas and things like that. But with OCD, the thought content, what I find actually happens quite often is not only am I the first person, but it's not in the first session. They're coming in for hand washing, or they're coming in for checking the lights or the stove, and I'm working with them and they're getting better. And then at some point they've decided they can trust me to tell me about their harm OCD and their sexual obsessions, and things that really are kind of attached to more shame. And that can take a long time for some patients. When it comes to dealing with family members and talking about intrusive thoughts, every family is different, right? Every family is a different system. And so you have systems that work really well with family members that are very supportive, and there's really nothing you can't tell them. And that's great. But a lot of families aren't like that. And there are families that have certain rules about what we can and can't talk about, and to whom, and under what circumstances. And that can contribute to a lot of shame. And I think when you're living in a family where whether it's true or you just feel like it's true, where you believe that you can't talk about what's going on in your head to your mother or your father or your brother or sister, whatever, that has an impact on your sense of self. It has an impact on your psychological well-being. You end up developing over time a lot of difficulty with shame and things that go beyond OCD.
Just a quick follow-up that leads me to wonder, in your experience, so if it is a family where there are certain things that we don't talk about, does that do you think that impacts the nature of the person's intrusive thoughts, or the I don't know, the category of what they struggle with, or no, not so much?
I think it can. I think invalidation affects human development. It's just across the board, right? So it doesn't have to be about OCD, but it just so often is about OCD if you have OCD and you can't talk about it. So yeah, it could make your obsessions a lot worse if you're getting the signal from the outside world that your thoughts really are really terrible because we can't even say them aloud.
Right.
But I think it's the invalidation that also does such psychological damage,
Mhm.
because there are people that you're supposed to trust, that you're kind of wired to assume are reliable, and then when you suddenly find out, wait, I can't rely on this person, even if it's not always true, but you might just believe that it's true, that they're going to judge me, or they're going to out me, or something like that.
Mhm.
That those are really sad situations, and those are situations where hopefully people who feel that way do get to talk to a therapist who can
Right.
validate and say like, oh no, and then you can work on ways to open the family up to understanding OCD, and not confusing the OCD symptoms with the person's identity or personality.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Hey, John, I'm Caitlin. We haven't formally met yet. I was on mute for a really long time earlier and didn't realize it. So, hey, you live and you learn.
Hi.
Well, first of all, wow, so far this has been a little emotional. It shocked me a little bit. I guess I've got the extra feels because I just started watching HBO's Girls for the first time, and this week the episode in which it's revealed that she has OCD hit me, and I wasn't expecting that. I didn't know that the character or the writer had OCD, so I'm extra touchy right now. So this is good. We have a question from someone who's joined us today, so I'm actually going to hand over one of these. I've had ERP with some success, but feel that I also treating deeper anxieties, lifestyle changes, and spirituality also help. What approach do you think combining with ERP is most effective?
Well, I agree that people aren't their diagnoses, and there's no person with OCD who's just a person with OCD. So, of course, looking into other ways to live a more joyful life and a life characterized by less suffering is a smart thing to do. In fact, in some ways, it's a privilege that you get to do once you've addressed the OCD, because it's the OCD that often gets in the way of any of that kind of exploration.
Yeah.
I may or may not be an outlier here, but I actually don't have much of an objection to psychodynamic forms of therapy that look into finding meaning in your life. I just don't think that that's how you're going to get people to stop doing compulsions and free themselves from their OCD. But if you have the CBT and the ERP working for you, and now you want to look into, what is this self that I keep referring to, and where is it, and what does it mean, and what is my story all about, and what's the deal with my relationship with my parents and my partner and stuff like that. I don't know that there's any one therapeutic approach that's like, well, then you should do this one. It really depends on the person.
Yeah.
We were talking about invalidation before. I find that a lot of people who have felt invalidated for a long time really benefit from doing DBT, because they have to relearn how to self-validate and how to address self-loathing and that sense of isolation that can develop when they feel emotions that are difficult. And at the end of the day, all therapy, including ERP, is about a relationship, right, between the therapist and the patient. And so there's different types of therapy where you form a different kind of relationship with the therapist that kind of informs you how to relate to people, and then you go and you practice that out in outside of the therapy room, much like ERP, but in a more relational way. And there's probably a long list of names that would say, names of therapies that say that's what we do. So I wouldn't say which one it is. I really think it depends on the person. Obviously, there's things that go along with OCD treatment really well, like ACT and things like that. But outside of the OCD world, nothing is inherently good or harmful. If it works for you, it works for you.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. And thanks, Ash and Forrest, for asking that question. That was a great question.
Yeah. And some of this is, for me, a little bit new, because when I started working at the retreat at Sheppard Pratt, the residential program, it opened me up to working in a team of a really multidisciplinary team. So I'm surrounded by psychiatrists and other clinicians who are practicing things that I just haven't as much contact with, that are much more psychodynamic, or even things like art therapy and trauma therapy and DBT and things like that. And I sort of see how they operate and how what they do is different from what I do, but I get to also witness firsthand like how it helps the individual that they're working with. So it's kind of neat working alongside other disciplines.
Well, I have a bit of a question that's kind of along these lines. I think the attendees question about all these other kind of, residual things beyond OCD that were treated, by ERP, are still kind of are still present. And we had some questions, about how much like self-judgment or self-hate kind of contribute to OCD, and how much that how important it is, or whether it's important to cultivate that sense of, self-compassion to fully, recover beyond just the refraining from rituals and, letting the intrusive thoughts or urges, pass by more easily, right? So do you see that those pieces sometimes fuel OCD? What would you suggest there?
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely essential. I don't think it's a good idea. I think you have to do it. Well, first of all, I think self-judgment and self-criticism are rituals. So a lot of times people say they're not doing their rituals, they're not washing their hands, they're not, seeking reassurance, they're not researching online. They're just like beating themselves up all day instead, right? Because why is this so hard for me? Why did I have that thought? What's wrong with me? So first, understanding that is a behavior that you're engaging in, a mental act that you're doing, and you have an intention. When you think about what the definition of a ritual is, right? It's a repeated behavior, aimed at reducing some kind of distress or getting some kind of certainty about your unwanted thoughts. And one of the characteristics of it being a ritual is that it's unlikely to work, right? The expectations that it would be done are unrealistic, that it would solve your problem. So when people are judging themselves and criticizing themselves, a lot of times what I find they're doing is they're trying to even up something that feels asymmetrical. Like, I might have been a bad person, or I might have done the wrong thing by having this thought or whatever it is. And if I criticize myself, well, then I've served my time, right? So just in case I'm a bad person, now it's even, because I'm a bad person, but I also hate myself, right? So it feels bad, so you don't think of it as a ritual. It's not like you do it and then you're like, oh, this feels great. But a ritual or a compulsion doesn't have to make you feel good. It just has to reduce the distress that comes with the uncertainty of the content of your unwanted thoughts. All self-criticism, in my experience, comes down to, duh, I should have known better than to end up here. Like, whatever the situation I'm in with this unwanted thought or this flat tire, whatever it is, I should have known better than to end up here. And that is born of a confusion about what control we have, right? We say all the time, I mean, you guys know in OCD treatment, right? You don't choose what thoughts you have. You don't choose what feelings arise. You can choose what sensations arise. It's also true, you don't choose who your parents are. You don't choose what predominant culture or religion you're raised around. A lot of things you think you control, you don't control at all. You didn't pick your best friend. Your best friend was the person who was the kid of the people who lived down the street who happened to go to your school and happened to sit next to you on the school bus, right? You didn't choose those things. So when you're saying I should have known better, like, at what point does that begin that you were supposed to know better, right? Everything that you've ever done, you did with the belief at the time that this was going to work out in your best interest. You just didn't get the results you wanted all the time. And now you're going back and you're saying, I should have known better. I'm so stupid. I'm so dumb, bad person. So the antidote to this is self-compassion, but self-compassion is not just, be as nice to yourself as you would to anybody else. That is a big part of it, but it's also just objective and practical. It's asking the question, what would be helpful now? Because that's the only question that's worth answering. Not how did I get here? What's wrong with me? Why can't I do anything right? It's at the end of the day, it's just like, okay, but the thing I have control over is this moment. How much and what kind of attention I give to this moment. I can't go back in time and, pay more attention to the road and so that I don't have an accident, right? I can only in this moment do what would be helpful. And sometimes the answer to that is doing some exposure if it's a problem with your OCD. Sometimes the answer to that is doing nothing and letting yourself off the hook. Sometimes the answer to that is, learning something that had you noted in the past, it would have been helpful, and now you know it in the present, and so it's going to be helpful later. That's how I think of self-compassion. It's more practical. I find a lot of people when they hear about self-compassion, like, oh, I'm nice to myself. Gross. It's weird. But when I say, like, when I explain that self-criticism is actually just assuming that you had control over things you don't have control over, and forgetting that you have control over looking for what's helpful now, that's how I think of self-compassion. I think it's much easier.
Right, right. And I think, especially for folks, after they've gone through address their typical OCD symptoms, perhaps there still may be this, hate or frustration or judgment of themselves of how long they let OCD go on, or how much or take over their life, how pulled away from the things that were important to them, that OCD did. And so I think, right, even though some of the other treatments may have different labels, right, we can probably still try to look at these thoughts, like you were saying, just even as like OCD thoughts, and that the turning over, trying to figure out whether you really did something wrong, or just, focusing so much on that regret, that, yeah, those things keep you miserable, just like focusing on, whether or not, you're contaminated, if you're really going to get sick, convincing yourself, right? So it may be a different flavor that isn't exactly like OCD, but it still can be really treated in kind of the same way, where we get back into our life, and we don't focus a ton of attention on those self-loathing kinds of thoughts.
Yeah, conditioning is a funny thing, because it becomes so hardwired over time. So I see a lot of people develop some mastery over their OCD. Their lives get so much better. And they're like, yay, I'm free. I feel so much better. What can I hate myself for now? I should have gotten better earlier, right? And then they're like, immediately, like, it's so conditioned. They just can't stand being okay. And it's a very interesting thing, because no, you could not have gotten better earlier. The person who went to treatment at the time they went to treatment isn't even you anymore. It was this other person who hadn't had the experiences that you've had. So it was inevitable. You could only have gotten better in this way, at this time, in this environment, and everything else is a fantasy.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me to wonder too, John, like, so obviously, I mean, like, I guess extrapolating from like what you're discussing, it sounds like you believe that recovery is possible from OCD. But I'm wondering, like, what does that look like? You know what I mean? Like, does that mean that the person never has intrusive thoughts anymore? Does that mean that they don't ever, like, have a lapse? Or what does that look like for, like, real people, who live in the real world, or,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I have to add the disclaimer to every answer. It's different for everybody, right?
Right.
But if you had asked me, what I think it looks like, a couple of things come to mind. So one is, having OCD is not the most interesting thing about you from your own perspective, right? You're not thinking of yourself as OCD right? You're thinking of yourself as who you are, and that may include that you have OCD, which is a different way of relating to it. Of course, you have intrusive thoughts. You're supposed to have intrusive thoughts. Everybody has intrusive thoughts. That's not supposed to go away. You're supposed to understand what they are, and for the most part, relate to them with a sort of charitable predisposition towards self-kindness, and you won't be perfect at it. And so I like when I'm talking to people about inhibitory learning in exposure therapy, and how the idea is that you can actually still feel the fear but be inhibited from trying to escape it. I like the metaphor of horror movies. So I like to watch horror movies, always have. And the thing is, like, you want to be activated by it. You want something to challenge you and to scare you. And sometimes, I mean, even for me, very rarely, but sometimes I'll see something, I'm like, oh God, I did not cause more than I can, right? But still, even in that space where I might feel dysregulated by some terrible thing that was presented to me, I don't have an urge to run away from, run out of the movie theater, right? I'm willing to have that experience because it's part of life. And for the most part, it's fun. And when it isn't fun, that's also okay. And living with OCD is kind of like that. It's like, for the most part, it's like, yeah, this is just how I think. Yeah, that's how I think. And then occasionally you just get the wind knocked out of you and you're like, God, OCD, you really threw me for a loop there. I think a lot of people also who feel like they have some mastery over their OCD have lapses and they have relapses and they have periods of time where they need to go back into therapy and kind of get a tune up, get the screws tightened again, because things have kind of gotten awry, and that's usually in response, not always, but usually in response to some kind of stressor. They're working too hard, or there's a problem in their relationship or something like that, and the OCD's like, oh, I found it in. I'm gonna see that they're down. I'm gonna come kick them. But also, even if everything is fine, you might still have these like 1 or 2 or 3 moments in a given year where you just like suddenly feel overwhelmed by it. And I think a lot of people who've had a lot of therapy, and I guess I'm speaking of myself in this case, can kind of have a sense of like, oh, okay, all right, this is gonna be a 3-dayer. I'm just gonna be on this subject for about 3 days. Oh, look at that, it's day 2. Well, that's fine, it's a 3-dayer. Oh, day 3, it's still there, okay. And it's usually gone by day 4, just because I've decided that I'm gonna allow myself to have this problem for a while, and I'm not gonna do compulsions, and I'm not gonna hate myself for it. And it's just like, living with this kind of brain that's predisposed to getting attached to things.
That we didn't pick the brain that we've got. We just have it. Like you said before, like we don't pick our parents. We didn't really pick our brain. It's just, it is what it is.
Yeah, that's right. When I was shopping for brains, I shouldn't have been so impulsive.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can I get the number for those people who mastered their intrusive thoughts so they can share their secrets with me? Because you can master anything, right? You can be a master gardener, a master naturalist. I would love to be a master of not intrusive thoughts. That made no sense, but anyway.
But I know what you're saying.
I wanted to just like point out something you said that I really loved. You said the person who started treatment isn't the same you, which made me remember I have like that first email that I sent to my therapist, sort of saying something's wrong. Like, can we meet? I almost want to like mark that as like a date on my calendar of like let's look back at this person, kind of thing, and just sort of acknowledge and recognize, how far I've come, which sort of goes back to that self-love and sort of putting the self-loathing behind. But anyway, sorry for my side note. We do have another question from one of our participants. Sorry, you can see how my brain just goes like this. It's not a
I'm keeping up. You're great.
All right, good. Someone can keep up. They actually have a really great question related to just relationships and OCD. So their question is, any tips or thoughts on how your significant other can understand more deeply and sympathize with a partner who has OCD?
Yes and no. And what I mean by that is there's certainly ways that you can communicate your experience of OCD and things you can give them to read. And I see lots of just beautiful couples where the partner who doesn't have OCD becomes very involved in the therapy and going to the conference and the participating in Awareness Week and things like that. Those are really nice things to see. But I also think sometimes people with OCD can get a little bit stuck on wanting certainty that the partner really understands, like knows what it's like from the inside. And maybe they can't. That doesn't mean that the love isn't pure or huge. It just means that they can't understand it, right? And they don't. So then the question becomes like, well, how much of it do they have to understand in order for me to feel safe? And like I'm with someone I trust who's not going to judge me, and so I can feel validated. Is it like 80%. I think for me, it's about 80%. I don't think my wife understands exactly how my brain works, but I don't think that she judges me for it. The part that she doesn't understand. I don't know that I understand her more than 80%. I don't know why I brought my wife into this. But I do think sometimes I see people with OCD get very, very focused on this, and they do it with the therapists too. Like, I'm not willing to move forward in my life until you, Jon Hershfield, have proven that you understand 110% exactly what's going on in my head. Otherwise, I can't move forward. So I don't know if that answers the question. I mean, I guess it's really two things. One, you know better than anybody how to open up to your partner and communicate with them in a language that they understand. So there might be a way of describing your experience that they're going to connect with. But also, they don't have to understand 100% for them to love you 100%.
Yeah, I think you answered the question, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but really focusing on, what do you need from that partner? What do you need that partner to understand? I think that's a good place to land with that question, certainly.
Good.
So we in Louisiana, you may know, or that we just had a major hurricane in most of the southeastern part of the state. And there's stressors like that or traumas that occur for folks with OCD. And I guess what we're wondering is a little bit if you had any thoughts about how folks can best take care of themselves, and I suppose if some of the traumatic incidents really can exacerbate OCD, and kind of how we just carry on even within the OCD community when there are these larger things that we can't control.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is self-compassion. The first thing is definitely kindness, always kindness. Be patient with yourself. Cut yourself some slack. Of course, your symptoms have gotten more severe. You just experienced the trauma. If you had psoriasis, you'd have worse psoriasis right now, right? If you have any chronic condition, stress is going to make the symptoms of that condition more visible. And OCD is a chronic condition. So you could be on top of the meds, on top of the therapy, on top of your exposures, and just still get knocked aside by something terrible that happens in your life. And that's how life is, right? I mean, we're not the authors of this story. Nobody would be like, oh, that's cool, let's do a hurricane next, right? And nobody gets to do that. These things happen, and you experience them, and they have an impact. And I've also seen, I was talking before about, working in this multidisciplinary residential program, how trauma and OCD inform each other.
Yeah.
How they can be so interrelated and interreactive, and how the trauma can push people into excessive ritualized behaviors that become OCD, and the OCD can put people in situations that they that become traumatizing situations, and they go back and forth. So something like experiencing an extreme event like what's happened down by you guys, I think the first thing you have to do is just normalize, yeah, I'm more symptomatic because I'm under more pressure now. I got to figure out how to, rebuild my business or my house, or make sure my family's safe, and things like that. And in a way, that will keep the symptoms from exploding if you just allow them. Be clear, I'm not saying hey, wash your hands if you feel dirty. I'm just saying, understand that you might be more symptomatic than you were yesterday, when something terrible happened to you last night. And by making space for that, it'll keep it from getting even more severe. Because a lot of times what people do is they say oh no, I can't have any of these thoughts and feelings. The thoughts and feelings break through anyway, and then it just kind of explodes into a full-blown relapse, instead of kind of widening your tolerance for being symptomatic and kind of keeping it under control while it's a little bit more severe than it was. Long answer short, self-compassion.
So, yeah, self-compassion seems to be where it's at, in so many ways, but I guess switching gears a little bit. So you've written several books on OCD. Do you have in mind like your next book on OCD? And if it's not a book on OCD, what do you think you might write about?
So I am currently writing a book with a colleague who's an expert in DBT, and
Cool.
it's not a straightforward OCD book. It's really a book for anybody who struggles with unwanted thoughts and difficult emotions, and it's about how to combine the core tenets of CBT and ERP with DBT. One of the things that has kept coming up in my career as I've watched people struggle with OCD, particularly when it's more severe, is that shame and self-loathing and the inability to regulate intense emotions really gets in the way of ERP, right? Because ERP is intentionally dysregulating.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I see people who are courageous and have a lot of inner strength and a lot of desire to get better. They get into exposure therapy, and then they get sidelined by shame, or they get sidelined by some sort of intense response, including things, like suicidality and escaping into substance use issues and things like that. And I also see a lot of times, like, when people do ERP, they might be doing it, they want to get better so badly that they're doing it in such a fashion that they're doing a little bit too much, and they're going into this like state in their mind that's really more of a panicked, dissociative brownout state, where they're missing the whole point of ERP, which is to learn that you can be a witness to this experience without doing compulsions. If you're not a witness to the experience because you're too overwhelmed, then you're not learning anything other than it's too hard and overwhelming. So we don't want that. So I've been thinking a lot about how do we find that sweet spot, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, I don't want people doing exposures at a 10. I want that like 6 to 8 range where they're like, this is really happening and I'm really doing it. It's the same way we treat physical fitness. Right? I want the weights to be really heavy, and I want you to be able to lift them. And I don't want you to hurt your back either. I want you to be able to use good form, right? So anyway, I'm working on this book with Dr. Blaise Aguirre, who is a DBT specialist at McLean, and I don't remember what it's called. It's like, unwanted thoughts and awful feelings or something like that.
That sounds like a good one. I'm gonna have to look out for it.
Yeah. I have to do the writing part actually first, but at some point it'll be great. But I'm excited. I'm excited about that. If I ever wrote another book and it wasn't about OCD, I don't know what it would be about. I've always fantasized about writing, a great horror novel or something like that. But the truth is I don't have the storytelling skills. I suppose I could take a course in it if I took it that seriously, but seems like
that would be cool.
Thing.
I was wondering if it might be about some sort of cooking book where you try out different sort of unusual vegetables and taste test them.
Michelle's calling me out because I last year through the pandemic, I got into this weird habit of buying the strangest things I could find at the grocery store and then cooking them and putting them on my Facebook. And so I had this thing going every week. I was making something weirder and weirder.
I had never heard of these vegetables. Like, these are not tomatoes and cucumbers. These are like
yeah.
No, but never heard of before.
I like that, a cookbook of cooking weird things you find on
Man, you're good at everything. Next, you're gonna be an OCD specialist, a food blogger, and a horror genre writer. I mean, I'm finally with you all the way.
That's great. Yeah, it's a combination of my adult reality and my teenage fantasies.
Multi-talented man we're here with today. All right, Jon, I'm going to hit you with a really good one here. We have a really important question, or I think it's a really important question. What are some red flags that can help an OCD sufferer to know when their therapist is not an OCD specialist?
No, that is an important question. Well, first of all, I mean, the answer might be kind of obvious. An OCD specialist will definitely say they are an OCD specialist. So you could just ask them. It would be one start. I mean, some people will say it and it's not true, and that's good. But OCD specialists tend to be quite proud of their specialty. So I think one of the red flags, and I know I'm not the only one to have noticed this, is if they appear to treat everything that you've ever heard of. It's unlikely that they're a specialist. Who would have the time? It's very time consuming to keep up. I mean, I feel constantly behind when it comes to expertise in OCD. There's always new studies coming out, and I don't read them all. There's always new trainings happening, and I can't attend them all. And that's with one condition. So yeah, the biggest red flag would be all saying that they treat everything. A lot of therapists put things on their website too that will give you clues as to how they treat it, and if you see things like comments like getting to the root of why you have OCD, that might be a red flag. Again, I try not to be too judgmental of non-evidence-based practices as a whole, because therapy is about a relationship, and a good relationship with a good therapist can make a massive improvement in your life. But if you're looking for OCD therapy and you're not getting a lot of, I know a lot of evidence-based talk, basically a lot of evidence-based presentation from the therapist, then you're just not going to get that need met. You might get some other need met, but yeah, the biggest red flag, it would have to be I treat everything because I'm the greatest therapist of all time. Right? I'd be suspicious of that. Do you guys have other red flags that I feel like there must be more, and I'm just not thinking of them?
The major one that I tell basically everyone is if, you look on their, say, Psychology Today profile, if they say they treat everything with every type of treatment, then they definitely don't. Right. And I think, sometimes, folks also don't look at like the real like specific aspect tied into their symptoms, right? So they may see contamination and they may assume or they may see hand washing or avoidance of things that are dirty in some way. And the provider may assume it's like, oh, well, you're afraid of getting sick, so that's what we're going to target, right? And not necessarily understand that there's where you can really look for what's the actual function of behavior, what's the real thing that they're concerned about, because that can certainly impact how we do exposures, right? So following the manual, too close where you're not really looking into what specifically works for this person.
Yeah, no, that's super important. It actually just made me think of another one, which is clinicians who advertise that they treat what you're looking for, but they're better at it than everybody else. Like where they talk about like that they have some sort of novel thing. Like I would be much more interested in somebody who's kind of boring, kind of like, I've had the training and I have the skills, and this is what I treat, and these are the, the best ways to treat it. Versus you've tried the rest, now try the best. I would probably not go towards that.
Well, that's a great slogan there.
What about a therapist who's ready to make a diagnosis really soon? I have someone in my life who was misdiagnosed with OCD years ago, and she told me that she saw the therapist one time. It was just one session, and was diagnosed. Is that something that's unusual? I mean, you guys would know, being the experts.
The diagnosing in one session is not unusual.
Okay.
A diagnosis can certainly be complex and take more time, and so it would also not be unusual for it to take more than one session. Therapists have to get it wrong sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, I do tend to think in diagnoses, and I'm meeting someone, I'm like, okay, I'm getting a little of this, a little of that, I wonder if there's some of this going on, and I may or may not say like, I've got it, you've got this, right on the first day, unless it's completely obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly at the residential level, we see at the retreat is it can actually take a couple of weeks before, as a team, we all kind of have put the puzzle together and seen like, okay, well, there's depression, there's OCD, and it looks like there might be this co-occurring thing. It can take some time, but as an OCD specialist, the 99% of the people who are coming to me at the outpatient level, they're coming to me because they already know they have OCD. So I'm certainly saying it's OCD. It does happen, and it's not talked about enough, that people get diagnosed with OCD when they don't have it. Usually it's underdiagnosed. I mean, usually the people with OCD, they're not getting the OCD diagnosis, so you don't do enough compulsions. I don't see you washing your hands, right? And then therefore you don't have OCD, and that's a shame. But it is also overdiagnosed when there are things like bipolar disorder, agitated depression, certain personality disorders, things like that involve obsessions and compulsions, but really aren't OCD. And treating it as OCD is going to make them worse. So to be careful with the diagnosis.
And
one quick comment. I think certainly it's the OC spectrum disorders that are often diagnosed as OCD, right? So someone with body dysmorphia, skin picking, hair pulling, they're often labeled as having OCD. And I could also see like getting the diagnosis in a session for an OCD specialist is very common, and because it's easy for us to know that, right? But for someone who, really treats the wide range and you don't have any like maybe classic symptoms, then yeah, it might take a little bit longer too.
Yeah, I think that may be why people a lot of times suffer for so long and they don't get diagnosed correctly, if they're seeing a non-specialist, with maybe not the most common symptoms. But Jon, I'm aware of the time. And so I'd like to throw out, maybe pitch the last question to you. And we really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, this has been fun.
So we're kind of like the little engine that could. OCD Louisiana, we're growing, we're wanting to be out there for the community. We really have a passion about OCD awareness and, and helping people have access to care and things like that. So we're kind of we're small, we're growing. Do you have any thoughts or ideas on how to maybe help people to have better access, or maybe, I don't know. I mean, any ideas, any thoughts on that? Very blurry question.
Can you clear it up just a little for me?
Just narrow it down
not completely, but just are you talking about how to grow?
Maybe Kristen can help me.
Or how to
Kristen, throw in a word or two.
or how to help people get better access to care. What's the focal point?
Sure. So I think the focal point too is not just like our affiliate is, small and growing, but in Louisiana, there are very few providers who treat OCD well. And so I think part of our mission, right, as I would say even as a provider, but also through OCD Louisiana is what would you say are the best ways for us to really get both, I think, people to know what OCD is more, but also, how do we get enough therapists or individuals inspired or interested in treating OCD so that it really fills in that gap?
So Jon, what she said.
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer. This has been a problem that we've been trying to solve for a long time. How do you address the supply and demand issue with OCD treatment? We were talking about this before. Why doesn't everybody treat OCD? It's wonderful. And it's not hard. I mean, it's hard work, like anything is hard work, but it's not like, but you do hear people like, oh, I don't want to treat OCD, it's too complicated, or, it's not my area of interest. And I'm not sure I understand why that's such the case. A lot of it obviously has to do just with the economics of it, right? Like how the system is set up, the people that are affordable, like people, this is something I'm learning, like in community mental health centers, for example, the intense amount of demand for any services lands on them. And they're seeing, patients every 45 minutes without a break, and, a gazillion patients that, and then the psychiatrists are seeing them for 15-minute med checks, and everybody's trying to help as many people as possible with, so many problems. And with OCD therapy, it's like, yes, so I've been trained and I do CBT for OCD, and, I'm going to see you once a week, or maybe I'll see you for 90-minute sessions. We'll do ERP. It works much better in a private pay model, the type of work that we do, than in an insurance model. So that's one part of the problem, which is like, how do you work with the insurance models so that it can be affordable and you're actually getting the care that works, and not just 45 minutes of somebody's attention who has to treat every kind of diagnosis. They don't get to choose. The patients are handed to them. They're not in private practice. They're working for these community centers. So that's way above my pay grade kind of answer. How do we restructure the whole healthcare system?
Yeah.
That's your answer. Restructure the whole healthcare system. That's what you
We need to have either legislators or senators really get it and create a bill that includes OCD with right up there with like treatment of depression and schizophrenia. I don't know.
Yeah, and you've seen what NoCD has done, the NOCD app, and how they've kind of figured out a way to work around, find their loopholes to be able to provide, the style of care that they provide, and that's why they keep growing, because of that ingenuity. And I think that there's other areas where people can use their ingenuity on the sort of grassroots level. I mean, just what you guys are doing right now, like, okay, do a Q&A with, somebody wrote a book, and like put it out there and let people see it. Go, oh yeah, that makes sense. I have OCD. Oh, that's what OCD treatment is like. Oh, okay. And then make clinician facing materials, make workshops. If you can make the workshops affordable and get the CEs, right? So then you have incentivized people to listen, and maybe 100 people go and 10 of them are like, oh, I'm really into this stuff. I think I'd be good at this, right? And now you've created 10 new, OCD therapists in your area. So part of it is just making it attractive to them. Like, why, we're all very busy. Why should I get extra training in anything? Make it worth their while. Anyway, those are my brilliant ideas. Fix everything, awesome. And everything will be fixed.
Well, we are definitely all out of time for today. So, Jon, we, very much appreciate your willingness to come and talk with us. And, we look forward to, seeing you again in the future. Just an announcement or two is that OCD Louisiana, we are having our 1 million steps for OCD walk next Saturday, October 23rd. And you can learn more information about that at ocdlouisiana.org. Any other final things from anyone else?
Oh, thank you so much again.
Yes.
Thanks to everyone who joined us today.
Yeah, thanks for everybody
here.
Yeah. Well,
awesome.
thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
And
it's been great.
And everyone definitely, check out the IOCDF, because I think, I know at least Jon and Michelle and I, can vouch for going to the conference in person, especially, once maybe next year. It's such a inclusive group of folks, both on the professional and the individual, level, and for families and for everyone really. So, all right.
Awesome.
Spread the word about OCD. It's OCD Awareness Week. All righty. Take care, everyone.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.